Welcome to Khawater Dev. In this video from the Bubble Quiz series, we will create a multiple-choice quiz. After setting up our model in the first video, we'll add various input and display elements, and then bind them to the buttons using conditions and workflows. In the end, we will be able to fill in the choices, add and remove them, preview the quiz, and finally check the answers. From where we stopped in the first video, and as a first step, we go straight to the Data tab to add the entries where we will store the different parameters of the quiz. We create two entries, the list of choices to save the options of the quiz, it is type text with a list format, and from this list, we specify the correct options inside the list of correct answers, as well, it is type text with a list format. During the editing phase of the quiz, we will use temporary storage before saving the quiz parameters into the database. This storage is made up of 3 custom states that we add to the quiz group. We begin with the list of choices with type text, then the list of correct answers with type text. In addition to the list of selected answers for the quiz test, with type text as well. Inside the quiz group, we start by adding a group where we will place the quiz entry items. In the Layout tab, we select Column as a container layout, check Collapse, which is needed when we preview our quiz, and then set a full width and a minimum height of 100 px as dimensions. Inside, we put a repeating group that we will use to create the list of choices. For now, let's choose text as a type of content, and the list of choices as a data source. Uncheck the fixed number of rows and type 46px as a minimum height. We check this to display all choices at once. For styling, we don't need the separator, so we remove it. For the cell's layout, we select row, full width, and a minimum height of one single cell, which is 46px. Each cell of this repeating group will contain, first, an icon as a delete button, and instead of the Bubble built-in package, we prefer to use the Google Material icon, a free plugin that you could add from the plugin marketplace. As a color, we choose red, therefore, no one will mistake its functionality, however we add the toolkit text as an emphasis. We fix the width of this element, center it vertically, and reduce its size. For the second element, we bring the input element which we think is sufficient for choices consisting of a few words, but for long texts, multi-line input should be chosen instead. We modify the placeholder to be more specific to each option. We import the initial content from the list of quiz choices. We check these to prevent the Enter key from submitting and to avoid empty entries. Let's increase the font size a bit. Again, we center the element vertically. For the width, we let it adapt to the available space by unchecking the fixed width option. We keep the height fixed with a 36px and add a left and right margin. The last element will be a checkbox. From the input forms list, we could find one that has this feature name, but if we test it, we notice the limitation set for its style. Instead, we use an icon. For now, we choose an empty square, and we add its functionality later with conditions and workflows. We change its color and fill tooltip text. Last, we style it as in the delete button. To add additional choices, we place just below the repeating group an icon from the Material icon package. We choose an icon with the appearance of a plus button. It's actually under the name Local Hospital. As usual, we add the tooltip text. For decoration, we trace its border with a fine dashed line. To emphasize, we place it in the middle, make its width larger, and give it space with some margin. At this point, when we preview what we have done, nothing is showing of the repeating group. Since the list of choices is supposed to be empty initially, we won't be able to fill in any choices without having the fill boxes. To solve this issue, we use the Toolbox plugin. It is a free plugin and very popular in the Bubble marketplace. For our purpose, we only need the list of numbers element, a tool that will fill the repeating group with a list of numbers instead of the list of choices. But before setting it up, we need to create a custom state for the number of choices inside the quiz group, and as a default value, what we put here will be the initial number of empty cases ready to fill. So as 3, this list will be 1, 2, and 3. For the list of number element, we have to specify the start number, we choose 1, the length of the list from the custom state we just created, and as incrementation, we put 1. This element will not be visible on page load, even so, it still takes up space that must be reduced. We reserve 10px just to keep it accessible for all updates. We complete this configuration by changing the data source from the list of choices to the list of numbers, imported from the toolbox element. Note that the same function of this plugin, we could actually recreate by filling up the same list of numbers using a workflow for the plus button, but admit that the plugin makes all of this simpler and more flexible. Now when we refresh our page, we see, finally, our empty options. Flip back to the Bubble editor and move on to adding some workflows. First, we start with the delete button. From the list of item actions, we choose the set state action. As a target element, we select the quiz group. We specify 2 custom states affiliated with this group, the number of choices, to reduce it by 1. And the list of choices, to delete from it, the option that has the current cell index of the delete button. Which concern the list of choices. To add new options, we need to monitor the entries of the option input elements inside each cell of the repeating group. From the Workflow tab, we click on the Add event, select, and input's value is changed, and search for the option input element. From the list of element actions, we choose the set state action. We specify the quiz group element, and select the list of choices as the custom state we aim to modify. To add the new item, we set the value of the state to the list of choices and add, using the plus operation, the input's value. The second action will run when editing a cell. We repeat the same selection of the first action, the quiz group element, and the list of choices for the custom state parameter. Inside the input value, we start with the list of choices, including the modified entry as a new item. We join them all using any particular suffix, as you choose, to render one line of text. After that, we apply the find and replace operation on this text to change the terms that have the value with the same cell index, inside the list of choices attached to our suffix, with the new entry added last and attached to the same suffix. Going back to the list type, we use the split operation by setting the text separator to the suffix we use to join the items. As the last operation, we add the unique element to remove any redundancy inside the lists. To validate the execution of this action, we define an activation condition that examines whether the current cell index is less than the number of items in the list. We end this workflow with the clear list action. We use this action to refresh the input cells and make them in synchronization with the list of choices. For the checkboxes function, we use 2 workflows, one to add a new item to the list of the correct answers, and the other to delete the item from this list. We define the activation condition for each workflow at the box level. With the first workflow, we check if the list of correct answers contains the item with the same checkbox order inside the list of choices. In case this condition is valid, we remove this item from the list using the setState action. This action will take the quiz group as the element and the list of correct answers as the target custom state. For its new value, we take the current list and remove the corresponding item order using the -item operation. With the second workflow, both the activation condition and the affiliate action take exactly the first workflow inversely. However, this makes copying this workflow easy to adapt. Validation becomes when the list of correct choices does not contain the corresponding order item, and the setState action is used to add the new item using the plus operation. We end up the configuration of the checkbox by adding an indicator aspect. We first copy the conditional expression from the first workflow, which is the expression that confirms that the list of correct answers contains the item. After that, we paste this expression inside the condition field. Change the icon to be checked box. And finally select the green color for the new icon. Now, suppose that an entry from the list of choices is edited or deleted, while the list of correct answers contains this element. In this case, we must create the actions that follow these changes. Let's get starting with editing an entry. This will trigger the inputs value is changed event. So within this workflow, we add a new setState action to update the item inside the list. As a process, we will follow exactly the same logic as used to change the element of the choice list, but with one single action. We begin by adding the edited entry from the inputs value, then join the resulting list with a separator, and we still are able to use the same suffix. After, use the find and replace operation to modify the edited item. In the text to find field, we search for terms that have the value of the current cell index in the list of choices and append it by the suffix. And for the replace field, we enter the inputs value appended to this suffix again. We use the split operation to recreate a list from the text we treated. Finally, we use the unique element operation to delete the last item because it becomes a redundancy of the changed item. As a validation condition, we paste the copied expression right here. Note that we used the list of choices before it gets edited for the find and replace operation, so we have to move this action back to the first position. With the delete workflow, the item we aim to remove from the list of correct answers will no longer exist in the list of choices because the minus operation works asynchronously. In other words, we used to take the element in the current order as a search item, but when we use the minus operation within the delete action for the choices list, we won't be able to reach it anymore. Note that this will always be the case even if we put the current action in the first position. For this reason, and to work around this, we use the intersect operation to rid off any item no longer exists in the list of choices. For the plus button, it adds 1 to the custom state number of choice, and that is it. Remember that this custom state represents the length field of the number list element. So the repeating group will update accordingly and add a new empty cell. This will be a routine action in fact. We set a state action, choose the quiz group element and the number of choices in the first two parameters, and finally increase the current number value by 1. We think we've done a lot here that deserves the preview. Let's go step by step to check the maximum possible scenarios and monitor each update that occurs in the custom states of the group quiz throughout the various operations. For the debugger, we select slow mode to make sure we don't miss any significant details during workflows. First, we try to add a new option. After entering our first input, the change event workflow is triggered to execute the different actions. Until now, the list of correct choices is empty, so we expect this action to be disabled for a while. The second action has no validation condition, so this input entry will be added to the list of choices. No entries changed, so this action will be ignored. For the clear list, the list reflects the cell's input, which means that this action will not affect the final result. We assume this time that the user decides to skip some fields to add the second entry. The new item appears as a second item in the input list besides the already filled input cell. This will continue until the clear list action erases all the entries and fulfilled them again as in the custom state list. When we repeat an input field, the plus item operation will ignore that input and the clear list action will remove it from the input entry. But be aware that the uppercase and lowercase entries are treated as two different entries and will be added to the list. Now, we play back and forth with the checkbox and verify the synchronization between the list of correct answers and the style of the checkbox, and more precisely when this list contains and when it does not contain the corresponding item. For editing, things are going to be tricky here, so we turn back to step-by-step debugging mode. We modify this entry specifically to activate the edit action of the list of the correct answers as well. As we already explained, the new edited item will be treated as a new entry and appended to the list. The join operation creates a line text containing all the options separated by our suffix. The find and replace operation will search for the edited option and change it by the new entry, where both of them are attached to the same suffix. The split operation turns back this line of text to a list. In this case, we will have two entries with the same value, and this is where the unique element operation takes action to delete the last element. Now, as we've done with the correct list, the rest of the action flow will repeat the same process to modify the list of choices. Note that the edit condition is valid, so in this case, the only difference from the editing of the correct list is that the plus operation is working separately from the other operations. When we hit the delete button, the first action removes the corresponding cell with the associated item from the list of choices. The second action has a valid condition, so as a result, the intersection operation will kick out the removed item from the list of correct answers. One last check is the plus button. It works without any complications. The next step now is to preview the quiz, a process that should check that all the choices have been filled in and also at least one option is selected as the correct answer. This check will take place first within the quiz preview workflow when the quiz is in the create mode, the first mode. We add two conditional statements to this expression: the number of choices equals the options saved to the list of choices, and the list of correct answers is not empty. Second, if one of these conditions is not valid, either an empty choice or no correct answer checked, we turn up the alert through the quiz button's second workflow. For the style condition, start with the choice input. If it is empty and the alert state is yes, the border color changes to red. With the checkbox, if the list of correct answers is empty and the alert state is yes, all the checkbox's icons turn red. For the quiz display and just below the group input, we place a repeating group. We copy it with its workflow from it. That will list the quiz choices. Two elements needed here, a text element and a checkbox, so we remove the delete button and the text input and bring in the text element. We define the same content as the text input and recreate the same style with a darker color for the font and the border. The Layout tab will be exactly the same. Too bad Bubble didn't support copying the layout style yet. For the checkbox, we rename it first to differentiate it from the checkbox of the correct answers. We keep our choice with the darker color. The list correct will be instead list selected. It's preferable to change the style of the checkmark icon to distinguish it from the correct checkmark. For the rest of the work, we need to adapt this checkbox by replacing all correct list entries with the selected list entries. As we did in the conditional tab, we continue to apply these overrides with the workflows associated with that checkbox, with an additional condition within the workflows boxes of being in preview mode, mode 2, to allow the checking. This work includes the conditional fields, the custom states, and their values, deployed within two workflows, one to add the option to the list of selections and one to remove it. To specify which group will be displayed, we first define a hide condition for the quiz entry when quiz mode is not in the create mode, which refers to the value 1. Using the same expression, we set the visibility condition to the quiz display group without forgetting of course to uncheck its visibility when the page loads, and the collapse when it is hidden. As a request to proceed to the check answer step, we must verify that at least one option is selected, otherwise we turn on the alert. For the alert, we will use the same workflow as in the preview step alert with a validation condition that checks if the mode value is 2, refers to preview mode, and the list of selected answers is empty. We copy this condition and use it for the check answers workflow, changing the list check to be non-empty instead of empty. A final step, which remains, is to display the quiz score, first by presenting it through the checkbox's icons and then giving the score results. For the style condition of verified answers and as a prerequisite, the quiz must be in the check mode, which refers to the third mode, and also, the list of selected answers contains this option. When these two conditions are valid, here is when we check if the list of correct answers contains this option. If so, the answer will be correct, and we identify it with a green color. We copy this expression and reverse the contain statement to not contain this option. In this case, we will have a wrong answer, and we identify it with a red color. Now, to calculate the final score of the quiz, we will use this formula which we took from an article on the internet. We put its link in the description. To do this calculation, we need to bring in the expression element, which is another element of the Toolbox plugin, and apply our formula inside the expression field. In the case of correct answers, the filter is constrained to the options of the list of selected answers that the list of correct answers contained, and by counting these filtered options, we obtain the number of the correct answer. The way to count the wrong answers will have the same logic, with one single difference. The constrain rule will filter the options of selected answers that the list of correct answers, this time, doesn't contain. For the rest of the expression, we have no complications with direct access to the number of choices. The result of the formula will be divided by the quiz's correct answers, and then multiply it by 10. The result type obviously will be a number type. This element is invisible on page load to avoid the error of division by 0 during the creation of the quiz. We type 10px for the height. And last, when the quiz is not in the create mode, we recheck the visibility state. Once we are done entering this score formula, we go to the conditional tab of the button and search for the quiz mode expression with the value 3. In the text field, we replace that hyphen with the value of the expression, rounded to 0 to get an integer. Noting that this formula could export a negative number, for example, when none of the correct answers is selected, we set another condition for this case and type 0 as the final score. As a bonus, for the high scores, we add a third condition to check the scores with values higher than or equal to 9. For this category, we type perfect as a label beside the score text. Since we already set the red color in the condition that has the third mode, we could delete these properties without any problem. As final touches, we add a second action for the editing workflow to clear the list of selected answers when turning back to the create mode. The last step will be with the database backup workflow. By clicking on the database button, the workflow will check the same validation condition used to switch from creation mode to preview mode. In case all conditions are valid, we use the create new thing action to initiate the save process. Now, we call the different entries we created at the beginning of this video. Starting with question, which gets the question inputs value, the list of choices set to the custom state L choices, and last, the list of correct answers set to the custom state L correct. In case one of the validation conditions is not true, we trigger the alert workflow. It will be the same as the alert set to preview the quiz. So we copy it from there and change the selected element to the database button. Everything is ready to take the quiz. So now, it is quiz time. Before all, we enable the development mode by clicking the F12. Then we turn off the debugger by switching this to false. As the debugging test that we made was with color choices, we will continue in this context with the question about rainbow colors. Now, if we try to preview the quiz without filling in the choices, the alert will be triggered and turns all the input choices border to the red color. Let's add some choices, leave an empty box, and repeat this preview test. As you can see, this time, only the empty box turns red. We keep adding additional choices and preview the checkboxes now as we set a validation condition of at least one choice to be selected. Well, the alert works, all checkboxes become red. There's nothing left to test with creative mode, so we pick the right choices and move forward in preview mode. In this mode, we define another selection condition to insist on answering the quiz. Let's try to answer this quiz, and in purpose, we make a misselection. Surprisingly, we have good marks here with the perfect label. It's how the formula works. It rewards the tendency to the correct answers and, in the same way, penalizes the tendency to the wrong answers. We turn back to the edit mode and switch to the mobile version. Nothing is different from the PC version. We show off this time and correctly answer the quiz. Perfect. Last, we save this quiz to the database, and we flip back to the database app to check if the data is saved. Here we are. All data are in their corresponding fields.